Hello, everyone, and welcome to Edison TV. My name is Jyoti Prakash, a healthcare analyst here at the Edison Group. We are joined today by James Garner, the CEO of Percheron Therapeutics, an ASX-listed biotech, which has recently pivoted focus to immuno-oncology with the in-licensing of HMBD-002, a novel VISTA-targeting checkpoint inhibitor. Welcome, James.
It's great to be here.
Great to talk to you, James. To start off, James, congratulations on in-licensing HMBD-002, which is a novel, potentially first-in-class checkpoint inhibitor. What drove this pivot for Percheron towards immuno-oncology, and how did you settle on this particular asset?
Well, Josie, I think our journey has really been one of trying to seize victory from the jaws of defeat. We had a late-stage trial failure in December of last year, and it left us looking for a new asset around which to rebuild our company. We didn't specifically look solely at oncology. We continue to think of ourselves as an oncology and rare diseases company. But of course, the reality is about half of all the deal flow out there is oncology, about half of all the investment into the life sciences industry is oncology. So if you're in the market for a new asset, oncology looms large. But also, I think for all of us working in drug development, or for everybody who invests in drug development, it's really where the opportunity to make a big difference in the lives of patients looms greatest. And so there was a natural gravitation to that space. We reviewed over 100 assets as part of our search, and this was by far the standout. We loved the quality of the work that had been done on it. We could see a clear path to take it forward, and we were really appreciative of the fact that it completed a successful phase 1 study, and we had some good clinical data in hand. So this was a standout opportunity. We were really excited to bring it into our company, and as you say, it's given us a new lease of life as an oncology business.
And James, when we think of oncology and maybe checkpoint inhibitors in particular, we think of Keytruda or Opdivo, which are huge blockbuster drugs. How is HMBD-002 different? And can you tell us a bit more about VISTA, the protein it is targeting?
Yeah. Well, VISTA is an immune checkpoint regulator. So just like the PD1, PD-L1 axis that Keytruda and Opdivo target. VISTA is a newer target. It was only first described about 13, 14 years ago, and one that's still not quite as well understood as some of the more heavily prospected targets like PD-1. But it's a particularly interesting target because it seems to be almost ubiquitously expressed on a very, very wide range of cancers. And it seems to have, in common with PD-1, a very central role in the immune response to cancer. But intriguingly, it also seems to be linked to resistance to existing immunotherapies, to, for example, PD-1 inhibitors such as pembrolizumab and nivolumab. So it has a lot of really interesting potential around it, and we think I think ever since drugs like Keytruda and Opdivo became mainstream, people have been looking for the next immune checkpoint target, and I think VISTA has a very, very solid claim to be that next target, and we very much hope so.
That's great, James. And we also see that HMBD-002 is a IgG4 antibody versus some of the other VISTAs which are in development, which are targeting IgG1. So what is the significance of this?
Yes, this is one of the things that at first sight seems to be a question of scientific nuance, and then actually potentially seems to be quite important. So as we all know, antibodies of which is the class of drugs to which HMBD-002 belongs, as well as drugs like Keytruda and Opdivo belong, antibodies come in different types. And now IgG1 antibodies are what we've tended to use in cancers. And they are just like the antibodies that our body produces. They're designed to destroy things. They latch onto a tumor cell and destroy it. And if it's a target that's just expressed on a cancer cell, well, that can be very, very helpful. But what we're actually trying to do with a lot of immunotherapies is not so much to destroy cells per se, but in fact to modulate the activity of the immune system. We're trying to make quite subtle changes in terms of how the immune system reacts to the cancer. And an IgG4 antibody, which has less of this destructive effect, less of what we call antibody-dependent cellular cytotoxicity, ADCC, an IgG4 antibody can be a much more subtle instrument for modulating the immune system. As it happens, both Keytruda and I believe Opdivo are IgG4 antibodies. So we're in good company. And as you say, just about everybody else who's tried to produce a VISTA antibody has produced IgG1 antibodies. We've seen some real safety concerns with many of these drugs. So far, touch wood, 48 patients worth of clinical data, we have not seen those concerns with our drugs. So on the face of it, it looks like this is a real point of differentiation.
You mentioned the safety profile of HMBD-002. It has successfully completed a phase 1 dose escalation study where it was tested both as monotherapy and in combination with Keytruda. What were some of the key highlights from the study, and when can we expect the full data to be released?
We're hoping to have the full data in hand, I want to say within the next couple of months. It's a little bit vague at the moment, but because this is a licensed drug, we don't have full control of everything at the moment. But I expect within the next couple of months we'll be able to share full data with investors. But we've already been able to share some highlights. And the key things with these, first of all, the drug was very, very safe and well tolerated. In fact, it was so safe and well tolerated that we were not actually able to establish a maximum tolerated dose. There just weren't enough toxicities. Now, sometimes with a drug, that can be a concern because it can suggest that the drug just isn't doing very much. But we've got some quite good pharmacodynamic data which shows that the drug is indeed acting on the immune system. It is doing what it's supposed to do. So it looks like the therapeutic window, the space in which the drug can operate between where it becomes effective and where it becomes toxic, that window is large. And that's a godsend for a cancer drug because many of the drugs we develop in cancer are quite toxic and it can really limit their use. So that's one key thing. The second thing is that the phase 1 study actually included some combination with pembrolizumab, with Keytruda. 20 of the 48 patients in the study were in combination. And really, it doesn't look any different in terms of toxicity in the combination than it does as a monotherapy. There's just no additive toxicity between the two drugs. And that's great because that makes us feel really comfortable about combining this with drugs like Keytruda. And then finally, this was a study done in advanced cancer patients, which is normal. It was done in a whole range of different tumor types. And that always makes it very, very difficult to infer efficacy signals from these kinds of studies. But we did see a number of individual patients who certainly seemed to be on drug and stable and doing well for much longer than we would expect on the basis of the natural history of their disease. So it's really just hints at the moment, but there are definitely some good hints that the drug is having an impact for some patients. We'll be picking through that data in particular over the next couple of months to really kind of understand that signal. But on the face of it, a drug that looks extremely safe and well tolerated and with some potential glimpses of efficacy. And that's a nice place to be at the end of phase 1.
Great. We've seen now checkpoint inhibitors such as Keytruda target multiple indications, be successful in multiple indications. You have also recently reported positive preclinical data in head and neck cancer and triple-negative breast cancer. Can we expect these to be the target indications for your phase 2 trials? And will you be testing this drug as monotherapy or in combination?
We're literally working through those kinds of questions as we speak. And both of those are real opportunities for us. Head and neck cancer can be a complex one just because it's such a heterogeneous tumor. There's so many different subtypes there. And so we're just a little wary of that. And especially because that data, that preclinical data, was specifically in combination with radiotherapy. And we need to just work out a little bit how we would approach that in a clinical trial setting. So high interest, but it might end up being something a little bit more in the nature of a side project. Triple negative breast cancer is of huge interest. We may try and do just a little bit more work to understand how we can focus the patient population. And then beyond that, there's a number of other cancer types that we're really interested in where we think this drug could have real potential. Some of those areas of interest take us down the path of using the drug as a monotherapy. Some of them point us towards combination use with a whole range of different drugs. So potentially with pembrolizumab, but potentially with radiotherapy, potentially with an EGFR inhibitor. There's really an embarrassment of riches with this drug. And actually our problem is not so much working out what to do with it, but it's trying to narrow this huge smorgasbord of opportunities to a couple that we think are most likely to succeed.
The next question is related to financing, which is always a major consideration when it comes to drug development. How do you plan to fund the phase 2 trials, especially given that it's immuno-oncology and these trials can get super expensive? So how do you plan to fund these trials is my first question. And what would be your strategy beyond phase 2 in terms of commercialization and subsequent development?
To answer the second part of that question first, I think it's probably fair to say that we have no great ambition to become a commercial pharmaceutical company. In other words, we don't really see ourselves selling this drug into the market. Never say never, but I think we'd be wise to recognize our limitations, and I think that may not be the most natural path. So we will be looking to partner this drug with a larger company at some stage, one or more larger companies at some stage. I think some clinical proof of concept data will enable us to maximize the value of that transaction for shareholders. So our focus is very much how do we get that clinical proof of concept data, some clinical evidence that the drug is efficacious as economically and as quickly as possible. And that's really what we're focused on now in our phase 2 study. Now, we're thinking about some quite innovative designs that I think potentially would let us do this work perhaps a little more economically than is commonly the case. We, as of our last financial statements, which are as of 30th of June, we did have 10.2 million Australian dollars in the bank. We stand to receive, obviously, the full benefit of the Australian government's R&D tax incentive, where you can get up to 43.5 cents in the dollar back from the government. So that, in effect, leverages the money that we have. And, like every company in our position, we're alert to things like grant funding opportunities. And then, of course, we're a pre-revenue listed biotech company, so recourse to capital markets is always there as an opportunity. It's not something that we anticipate making very heavy use of at this stage. I think we can get a lot of work done with not much more than the resources we have. So we're really working to try and at least get some runs on the board before we start thinking about very substantial financing activity.
Great, that's very insightful. Thanks, James. And just to wrap up, you plan to commence the phase 2 trials from 2026 onwards. What can investors look forward to in the run-up to these trials?
I think there's a couple of things that are relatively near term, actually, that I think will potentially be really kind of important points for investors. The first is that we'll be getting full phase 1 data, which we'll share with the market as soon as we have it. As I say, we're expecting that somewhere probably in September, October timeframe. And we don't yet have all that data in hand, so I don't really have any pointers. It is a phase 1 safety study, so to manage expectations, there probably won't be blinding insights here. But I think that will be really important data, particularly in terms of putting the drug on the radar for investors and for potential future partners. So that's one thing. Second thing is that we plan sometime, maybe a month or two later, sort of in a fourth quarter timeframe, to share details of our planned phase 2 study. We want to be in a position to come out and say, here is the study, here's what we're going to do, here's the cancer type or types that we're focused on, and perhaps even here's some indication of the economics of the study. And I think that will really make plans real for investors. That's really where they can see, well, here's where this goes, and here's how we start to value it. And then I think beyond that, investors will see quite a lot of sort of progress milestones, the sort of soft pointers as we as we start to kind of engage CEOs, CROs, as we start to form our team, as we start to do all the work in the run up to a study, I think investors will start to see us picking up the pace. We're in a little bit of a planning phase at the moment, which is not always the most exciting time for the market. But once that switches into an implementation phase, I think there's a steady flow of operational milestones that start to come through. And again, I think that's really where the rubber hits the road and where things get exciting for investors. And I think that will be coming up in a matter of months. So I think it's a really exciting time for the company.
Thank you, James, for talking to us today. We look forward to following your progress with this asset. For more information, we direct our audience to the Percheron Therapeutics website and edisongroup.com, where we plan to publish an initiation note in September.